Welcome to the Stillness Broadcast. Tonight we're lingering in the thin spaces where ordinary life frays at the edges, and something patient reaches through. Settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let the room be just a room, for as long as it can manage. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. There's something profound about knowing we're scattered across the world, but gathered here in the dark together. And if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, you can subscribe, only if it earns it. Let's begin. Story 1. The first time Margot Blackwood noticed the smell, she was standing in line at a pharmacy on Myrtle Avenue, watching the fluorescent lights stutter the way they always did when the automatic doors opened. The smell wasn't perfume, it wasn't rot, it wasn't smoke, it was the absence of all three. It was nothing. She stood there with a basket of paper towels, a 2-liter bottle of ginger ale, and a box of latex gloves that made her feel ridiculous. And she realized the air inside the pharmacy didn't have any of the usual Brooklyn things in it. No detergent drifting in from someone's laundry, no winter breath, no warm sugar from the candy display, no ghost of subway metal on people's coats, just blankness. Like the room had been wiped. Margot Blackwood, 27 years old, recently moved back to New York after failing out of a master's program in museum studies. Worked nights as a cataloging assistant for a private auction house that specialized in estate dispersals, which was a polite way of saying they cleaned out dead people's apartments and sold their things. She had always been good at handling objects. People were harder. People changed. People asked questions. Objects stayed quiet and honest. A ring was a ring. A suitcase was a suitcase. A photograph was a rectangle of paper you could label and log, and then put away in a climate-controlled drawer. Her therapist, Dr. Min Park, had said that Margot's preference for objects made sense. It was a kind of control, a kind of safety. You could hold a teacup and know exactly where it ended, and you began. Margot had nodded and not told Dr. Park that sometimes objects didn't end where they were supposed to. Sometimes they reached back. In the pharmacy line, she turned her head slightly, searching the aisles for the source of the nothing smell. There was an elderly man in a flat cap holding a cane and staring at the greeting cards as if reading them could keep someone alive. There was a woman in scrubs buying 2 bottles of wine, her eyes red and tired. There was a teenage boy in a puffer jacket chewing gum loud enough to be heard over the store music. And then, at the end of the last aisle, she saw a section of air that looked wrong. Not darker, not lighter, just thinner. Like the world had been rubbed with an eraser until the paper underneath showed through. Margot blinked. Her eyes watered from the harsh lighting. When she looked again, the aisle was normal. Shampoo, condoms, aspirin, little boxes arranged like teeth. She exhaled and told herself she was exhausted. She'd been working too many nights. She'd been sleeping too little. And her apartment, her tiny 3rd-floor walk-up in a brownstone off Bedford, still didn't feel like hers. It smelled like previous tenants, and old paint, and the faint moldiness that all New York apartments eventually carry like a second skin. She paid for her things, shoved the receipt into her pocket, and stepped back out onto Myrtle. The cold air hit her with honest smells. Diesel, pizza, wet trash, someone's cigarette. And beneath it, the nothing smell again. This time, it was behind her, trailing her like a polite stranger. Margot turned. Hard. Nobody. Just pedestrians and traffic, and a man walking a small dog in a bright jacket. The dog looked up at her and whined, then pulled hard on, the leash as if it wanted to get away from her, or away from whatever hovered behind her shoulder. Margot walked home faster. At her apartment, she did what she always did when she felt her mind sliding. She made a list. Clean kitchen, throw out expired food, email Dr. Park about insomnia, call mom, bring box to work. She taped the list to her refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a little museum plaque. She drank ginger ale in slow sips and told herself the fizzy burn was real, that the taste anchored her. Then she opened the box. It was a shallow cardboard banker's box from the auction house, sealed with a strip of tape. Her manager, Denise Rourke, had handed it to her earlier with her usual brisk efficiency. New intake, Denise had said. Small but complicated. Tag everything, photograph everything, and don't lose the label. The client is touchy. Client? Margot had asked. Denise had given her the look she reserved for employees who asked questions. The family, the executor, whoever thinks they own grief. Margot hadn't argued. She'd taken the box like it was a sleeping animal. Now at her kitchen table, she cut the tape and lifted the flaps. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a mirror. Not large, maybe 12 inches by 8. A hand mirror with a beveled edge and a silver handle tarnished in places like bruises on metal. It should have smelled like old dust or metal polish. It smelled like nothing. Margot held it up. Careful. Her fingers tingled where they touched the handle, like she'd pressed against a battery's terminal. She turned the mirror toward the kitchen light. Her reflection looked back. Same as always. Dark hair pulled into a loose knot. A face that looked younger than she felt. Smudges under her eyes. A small scar on her chin from falling off a bike when she was 11. But behind her reflection, the room looked rearranged. The refrigerator was on the wrong wall. The window was closer. The curtains, different. The sink was where the stove should have been. Margot's stomach tightened. She turned around quickly to verify her actual kitchen. Everything normal. She looked back at the mirror. The reflection corrected itself. Refrigerator back where it belonged. Curtains the same. Sink in its place. Her breath came shallow. She set the mirror down on the table and stared at it, like it might move. Then she laughed. One small, ugly sound. She had handled hundreds of objects. Thousands. She had cataloged jewelry from divorce settlements and heirlooms from people who died with no children, and boxes of photographs that had never been labeled and never would be. She had found weirder things than a mirror with a trick of light. It was probably warped glass, old silvering, cheap novelty piece. She wrote a tag for it with the neat block letters she used at work. Hand mirror, silver tone, unknown maker, vintage. Condition, fair. Notes, possible glass distortion. She took photos from 3 angles. She logged it in her spreadsheet. She tried to treat it like every other object. But when she went to wash her hands, she felt the air shift behind her. Not movement, not sound, a pressure change, like stepping into an elevator. Margot turned. The mirror sat on the table, angled slightly toward her. She hadn't moved it. She had left it flat, and in the glass, her reflection was still there, staring. But her reflection's eyes weren't looking at her. They were looking past her, toward the open doorway to her bedroom. Margot's mouth went dry. She forced herself not to turn, forced herself to keep her gaze on the mirror. Her reflection's pupils flicked, small movements tracking something that Margot couldn't see. Then, very slowly, her reflection smiled. Margot did not. The smile in the glass was careful, measured, like someone trying out a face they weren't used to wearing. Then the smile faded. The reflection returned to normal. Margot's hand shook as she turned toward the bedroom doorway. Nothing. Just a dim hallway and her unmade bed and a heap of laundry. She turned back to the mirror. Her reflection looked exactly like her again, and she hated it for the relief it offered. That night, she put the mirror back in the box, folded the flaps down, and slid it under her bed. She told herself she was being practical. She didn't want it out. She didn't want to keep looking at it, but she could feel it under the bed, the way you can feel a cat watching you from a dark corner. An attention, a weight. She lay in the darkness, listening to her building's pipes click and settle. At 3:12 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from Denise. Need the mirror inventory in system by morning. Don't screw it up. Margot stared at the screen. Denise never texted her at night. Margot typed back, half asleep. Okay. Her phone buzzed immediately. New message from Denise. It wasn't a reply. It was a photo. A grainy image, shot in low light. A mirror on a table. Margot's kitchen table. And in the mirror's reflection, Margot stood in her doorway, looking at the mirror. But Margot was in bed, her throat constricted. She sat up so fast her sheets twisted around her legs. She turned her phone brightness down, afraid the light would draw attention. The photo showed her face turned slightly, the angle of her chin, her hair loose around her shoulders. In the reflection behind her, something else stood in her bedroom doorway. Something tall, too tall for the doorframe. Its head tilted as if its joints allowed angles that human necks were never meant to manage. Margot's hands went numb. She deleted the message, then checked her message thread with Denise. The thread showed no photo, only Denise's text. Need the mirror inventory in system by morning. Don't screw it up. And Margot's reply, okay. Margot's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. You looked away. She stared at the words until they blurred. She typed with trembling fingers. Who is this? The reply came instantly. Not a name, not a threat, a question. What did you take? Margot's heart hammered. She thought of objects and numbers and receipts, thought of her own failures, the way she had left graduate school mid-semester with a suitcase full of books she never returned, the way she had moved back to New York with no plan besides surviving. She typed, I didn't take anything. The reply came, you did. You took his face. Margot held her breath. His, she thought of dead people whose apartments she'd emptied, of photo albums without names, of a man's wedding ring in a plastic bag labeled Lot 14B, of a set of dentures still in a glass of water because no one wanted to touch them. She typed, whose face? The phone buzzed. The mirror's. Margot stared at the message until her eyes hurt. Then she slid out of bed and knelt on the floor. She reached under the bed for the box. Her fingers found cardboard, dust, a loose sock, then the smooth, cold metal of the mirror's handle. When she pulled the box out, it was heavier than before. It scraped against the floor like it carried weight that didn't belong to cardboard and paper. Margot set it on the bed and opened the flaps. The mirror lay inside, wrapped in brown paper. She unfolded the paper. The mirror was facing up. Margot had put it face down before. She knew she had. She had wrapped it carefully so the glass wouldn't scratch. Now it lay open, as if it had been waiting. Margot held her phone above it like a flashlight. Her reflection stared back, pale and frightened. But this time, behind her reflection, the room was not her bedroom. It was a small office, fluorescent lit, with beige walls and a desk piled with folders. A framed certificate hung crooked. A plant sat dying on a windowsill. A woman sat behind the desk. She looked up, at Margot through the mirror like the mirror was a window and Margot was the one trapped inside it. The woman's face was older, late 50s maybe, gray hair cut blunt, cheeks hollowed with exhaustion. Her eyes were the same shape as Margot's. Margot's stomach rolled. The woman opened her mouth. Margot heard nothing, not a whisper, not a breath. But the woman's lips formed words with the slow care of someone speaking through thick glass. "Help me?" Margot jerked the mirror away as if it burned. The reflection snapped back to her bedroom. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown number. You see now." Margot swallowed hard and typed, "Who is she?" The reply took longer this time, like whatever was on the other side had to consider its answer. "She made you." Margot's breath caught. "Mom. No, not Mom." Her mother was alive, in New Jersey, always calling too often, always insisting Margot come home for dinner and bring laundry. This woman looked like Margot's mother, only in the way that strangers can resemble each other. No, this woman looked like Margot would look if she lived through a different life. A life with less sleep, less softness, a life where the world had worn her down like sea glass. Margot typed, "Where is she?" The mirror's glass clouded, as if fog had formed on the inside. Then the image returned. The office again. The woman held up a folder. On the cover, written in thick marker, was a name. Margot Blackwood. Margot's blood went cold. She felt like she was falling slowly through the mattress. The woman tapped the folder, then pointed toward a door behind her. The door was closed. It had a little window in it, the kind used in institutions. Beyond the window, a hallway with more fluorescent lights, more beige walls, a hospital, a facility, somewhere that smelled like bleach and paper cups. Margot's hand trembled. She leaned closer and the mirror's cold rose into her face like winter breath. The woman mouthed words again. "You are the version that left." Margot blinked, tears gathering. No, she had left graduate school. She had left museums. She had left the idea of being someone interesting. She hadn't left herself, had she? She thought of the nothing smell, the thin air, the moment in the pharmacy when the world had looked like it was being erased. She whispered into her empty bedroom, speaking to the mirror like it might hear. "What do you want?" Her reflection in the mirror didn't answer, but the woman in the office did, lips moving carefully. To come back. The lights in Margot's bedroom flickered. Once, twice. The air pressed against her ears, that underwater sensation that made her jaw ache. Margot's phone buzzed again. Unknown number, trade. Margot's fingers went numb. She typed, "Trade what?" The reply, "Her time for yours." Margot stared at the words until they stopped looking like language. Her time, yours. She thought of her life. 27 years, small and messy. Failed degree, dead-end job. A few friends she rarely saw. A mother who loved her too tightly. A father who had stopped calling after the divorce like Margot was an artifact from his old life he didn't want on his shelf anymore. She thought of the woman in the mirror office. Late 50s, still alive, still breathing, still trapped behind institutional doors, apparently thinking Margot was some splintered piece of herself. Margot's stomach turned. "No," she typed. "No trade." The mirror's reflection changed. Not to the office, to her own bedroom, but wrong. Her bed was made, neat, no laundry. The walls were a different shade. A framed photograph hung above the dresser. Margot as a child smiling, holding a certificate. On the bedside table, where Margot's phone sat now, there was a pill bottle. Margot read the label, though the letters blurred. Chlor. Something. An antipsychotic name. Her mouth went dry. The mirror showed Margot sitting on the bed, older than 27, hair streaked with gray, hands trembling as she opened the bottle. The older Margot looked toward the mirror, looked directly at Margot as if seeing through time. And then the older Margot mouthed words, and Margot understood them without sound. "Stop taking them." Margot's hands shook so hard the mirror rattled. She pulled it away and slammed it back into the box. Her phone buzzed again. "Unknown number, you already did." Margot stared at that line, and her mind reached backward, searching memory for proof of her life. She remembered moving into her apartment. She remembered getting the job. She remembered last Thanksgiving, but the memories felt thin, like cheap paper that could tear if she pressed too hard. She opened her photo gallery on her phone. Her recent photos were of work, objects, jewelry, a chair with a cracked leg. She scrolled back further. There were fewer personal photos than she expected. No pictures from graduate school, none from her supposed museum program. No group shots with classmates, no smiling shots in front of campus buildings. There were photos from years ago, high school friends, family dinner, a dog that had died. Then a gap, a dead zone where her life should have been. Margot's breath came ragged. She opened her email and searched for the university. The inbox showed no messages. She searched for student loan statements. Nothing. She searched for Dr. Min Park. She found an email thread with appointment reminders. But when she clicked one, the text looked wrong. The date's impossible. The reminders were scheduled for sessions at the Brooklyn Health Facility, not a private office. And the address was not a clinic. It was a hospital complex. Margot's hands went cold. She stared at the screen until the words blurred into gray. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. Unknown number. Margot didn't want to listen, but her thumb pressed play anyway, because fear is a kind of gravity. Silence for 10 seconds, then the sound of someone breathing, slow, rhythmic, the breath of someone asleep. Then a voice. Margot's voice. Not her speaking voice, but the careful, calm voice she used at work when she labeled objects and kept her hands steady. "I'm leaving," the voice said. "I'm leaving and I'm taking what I need." Then a second voice, older, the woman from the office. "No," the older voice said. You can't split like that again. You'll..." The recording cut off. Margot dropped the phone like it burned. Her apartment felt smaller, the walls closer, the air heavier. She thought of the mirror as a doorway. She thought of her as a splintered version of someone else. A younger escape, a fragment that ran. A thought surfaced, sharp and sudden. What if her entire life was the escape? What if the city was the hallucination? What if she had been in a facility for years? And the mirror was not haunted but reflective, forcing her to see the truth she had avoided. Margot stood, legs weak. She walked to her bathroom mirror and flicked on the light. Her face stared back, pale, real. But behind her reflection, in the bathroom doorway, something tall stood. Margot's breath stopped. She didn't turn. She couldn't. In the mirror, the tall thing leaned closer, like a curious animal. It had no distinct face, just a shifting blankness shaped like a head. But where its mouth should have been, Margot saw motion, a ripple, like something speaking without sound. The air around Margot's ears pressed harder. Her eyes watered. The tall thing's blank face moved closer until it was almost touching her reflection's shoulder. And then it did something worse than looming. It lifted a hand. Too many fingers. Too long. It touched Margot's reflection on the cheek. Margot felt the touch on her own face. Cold. Not like ice. Like metal that had been outside in winter. cold deep enough to hurt bones. Margot gasped and spun around. The bathroom doorway was empty, but her cheeks still burned with cold. She turned back to the mirror. Her reflection had a faint gray print on her skin, like a handprint made of frost. Margot whispered, voice shaking, "What are you?" The mirror reflection's mouth moved, but it wasn't her mouth moving. It was the mirror itself. The glass subtly warping, rippling like a pond, and in her mind, without sound, she understood the answer. "We keep what you throw away." Margot's throat tightened. She felt tears gather. "I didn't throw her away." The answer came, heavy and patient. "You did. You labeled her. You logged her. You put her back under the bed." Margot's knees weakened. She gripped the sink. Her mind raced through her work, the way she handled other people's lives as inventory, the way she treated grief like objects, tag, photograph, store, sell. She thought of her own grief, her own fear, her own shame. She had done the same to herself. She had turned pieces of herself into objects to manage, and now something had noticed. The air pressure eased suddenly, like a hand releasing her eardrums. Margot stumbled back, breathing hard. Her phone buzzed again on the bed in the other room. She walked to it slowly, like approaching a wild animal. "Unknown number. Tomorrow, bring the mirror to the address attached." An address appeared below the text. Brooklyn Health Facility, 3rd floor, room 347. Margot stared at the message. Her hands trembled. Then another message, immediately. "If you don't, we come collect." Margot sat on her bed and stared at the box under it like it was a coffin. She did not sleep. At dawn, the city outside her window turned gray-blue. Garbage trucks groaned. Someone shouted on the street. Life insisted on itself. Margot dressed in layers, her body moving by habit while her mind floated somewhere above her. She wrapped the mirror in brown paper again, tighter this time, like she could restrain it with tape and cardboard. On the subway, she held the box on her lap and watched the other passengers. Faces in their own worlds. A child with headphones, a man reading a paperback with the cover torn, a woman applying lipstick with a steadiness Margot envied. None of them looked at Margot, but a few glanced away too quickly, as if the air around her made their skin itch. At the hospital complex, the lobby smelled like disinfectant and coffee. Real smells, safe smells. Margot approached the elevator bank with the box in her arms. A security guard glanced at her, then looked away. She thought irrationally that he didn't want to see her. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt too long. The air in the elevator had that same blankness. The nothing smell, as if the mirror had taught the space how to forget. Room 347 was at the end of a hallway lined with closed doors. Margot's footsteps sounded too loud. She found the door marked 347. A small window at eye level showed a dim room inside. Margot leaned closer. She saw a woman sitting on a bed. Gray hair, hollow cheeks, the face she'd seen in the mirror. The woman looked up and met Margot's gaze through the window. Her eyes filled with something that looked like relief and terror at the same time. The woman raised a hand, pressed it against the glass. Margot pressed her own hand against the window from the hallway side, their palms aligned, separated by an inch of reinforced hospital glass. Margot felt a faint warmth through it. Human warmth. Her throat constricted. She whispered, "Who are you?" The woman's lips moved. Margot read them. The skill from years of watching faces. The way you learn to read unspoken truths from small movements. The woman mouthed, "I am what you ran from." Margot's breath hitched. The door handle behind her clicked. Margot spun. A nurse stood there with a clipboard. Her badge read C. Alvarez. "Can I help you?" the nurse asked, voice calm, polite. Margot clutched the box tighter. I'm here to deliver something." The nurse looked at the box. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition, like she had seen that exact shape before. "That's not allowed," she said gently. "Personal items have to be checked." "What's in the box?" "A mirror," Margot said, and her voice cracked on the word. "It belongs to her." The nurse's expression softened with something close to pity. "Sweetheart," she said, "there's no one in that room." Margot's stomach dropped. She turned back to the window. The bed inside was empty. Blank sheets tucked tight. No woman. No gray hair. No handprint. Margot stumbled back, dizziness sweeping her. She looked at the room number again. She looked down the hall. At the far end, the overhead lights flickered once, and for a second the hallway lengthened, stretching into a corridor that didn't belong to this building. A corridor lined with mirrors, hundreds of them, each one reflecting a different version of Margot, different ages, different expressions, some crying, some laughing, some screaming silently. And between the mirrors, tall, blank-faced things moved slowly, like librarians in an archive, keeping track. Then the light steadied, and the hallway was normal again, ending in a vending machine. Margot's hands shook. She looked at the nurse again. The nurse's face was still calm, still kind. But the nurse's reflection in the small window of room 347 smiled with a careful, measured smile that did not belong to kindness. Margot took a step back. The nurse's voice remained gentle. "You should go home. You look like you haven't slept." Margot's mouth went dry. She nodded automatically and turned away, walking down the hallway with the box clutched tight. She didn't run. Running would make it real. She didn't look back. Looking back would show her something she couldn't unsee. She rode the elevator down and exited into the cold air of Brooklyn, where people ate bagels and cursed at traffic and lived. On the subway ride home, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Too late. Margot stared at the message until her eyes blurred. She opened the box just a crack, right there on the train, because she needed to know. The mirror inside reflected her face, pale, wide-eyed, and behind her, on the train, the passengers were gone. The seats were empty. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed at a pitch that made her molars ache. And in the dark window, glass beside her, her reflection sat alone, holding a box, while behind her shoulder a tall thing leaned close, patient as a shadow. Margot's breath came fast. She closed the box. She looked up. The train doors opened at the next stop. The sign on the platform read, "Brooklyn Health Facility." Margot hadn't pulled the emergency cord. She hadn't changed trains. She hadn't even moved. But the doors were open, and the air outside smelled like nothing at all. And a voice on the intercom said, in a tone too calm to belong to a human conductor, "Final stop." Margot clutched the box and stepped onto the platform. Because her legs moved. Because her choices had gotten thinner and thinner until there was only one direction left. And because, deep down, she knew the truth that objects had always taught her. What is stored does not disappear. It waits. Story 2. At 2:19 a.m., Felix Ashford stood in the sound booth of the Hawthorne Hotel ballroom and listened to a room full of rich people laugh as if laughter could buy safety. The Hawthorne sat on the edge of downtown Providence like a polite old liar. 12 stories of renovated marble and brass, a place that smelled like lemon polish and expensive cologne, and money that had never had to sweat for itself. Felix Ashford, 68 years old, recently retired from 35 years as a broadcast engineer for a public radio station, had agreed to take a part-time gig running sound for private events because retirement had turned out to be a long, quiet hallway, and he didn't know how to walk it without hearing his own thoughts too clearly. His wife had died 3 years ago. Not dramatically, not tragically, just a stroke in the kitchen while she was chopping onions. Her body had slumped to the tile, and when Felix found her, the knife was still in her hand, and the onion smell was sharp enough to make him cry. He'd learned quickly that grief is not loud. Grief is a hum. It lives behind your ribs and never turns off. It's a frequency you eventually stop noticing until you're alone in a quiet room, and then it's the only thing you can hear. Now in the sound booth, Felix adjusted levels on a digital mixer, while the ballroom below held a charity gala for a children's hospital. The speakers played jazz at the perfect volume, present but not intrusive, designed to make people feel cultured without having to listen. Felix had always been good at sound. Sound was honest. It obeyed rules. It traveled. It decayed. It could be measured. People were harder. People lied with their voices. People used tone like knives. He wore his old studio headphones around his neck, not because he needed them, but because he liked the weight, a familiar pressure. Tonight's event had gone smoothly until the donor speeches. A woman in a blue dress had taken the microphone, smiled at the crowd, and started telling a story about little warriors and miracles, and Felix felt his teeth ache. Not from the words, from something underneath them. A thin whining noise, almost beyond hearing, riding the microphone signal like a parasite. He glanced at the mixer. No distortion, no feedback. The levels were clean. He leaned forward, putting one ear close to the monitor speaker. The whine wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from the room itself. The ballroom chandeliers glittered. The crowd clapped and laughed and sipped wine. And beneath all that human noise, there was another layer. A silence that wasn't silence, but a shape. A pressure. The feeling right before your ears pop on an airplane. Felix swallowed. His hearing wasn't perfect anymore. Age did that. Years of live audio did that. But this wasn't tinnitus. This wasn't random ringing. This was patterned. It pulsed in intervals like someone tapping on glass from the other side. He turned the music down slightly. Not enough for anyone to notice. Just enough that his booth felt less crowded with sound. The pressure remained. Felix's fingers hovered over the equalizer. A thought flickered through him, absurd and immediate. If I can find the frequency, I can control it. It was the kind of thought he used to have in the studio when a signal went wrong, when an old tape hissed, when a caller's phone line buzzed. Fix the sound, make it clean, make it behave. He adjusted a filter, cutting a narrow band of high frequency. The pressure shifted, not reduced, moved, like something had turned its head toward him. Felix's throat tightened. He sat very still and listened. Down in the ballroom, the woman finished her speech, and applause rose like warm water. Then the microphone squealed briefly, a small hiccup of feedback. The crowd laughed. Felix frowned and checked his levels again. Everything normal. But in the half-second of that squeal, Felix heard something else layered inside it. A word. Not a word through sound, but a word as meaning, arriving in his mind as if his brain had translated pressure into language. Listen. Felix's palms went damp. He adjusted his headphones, sliding one ear cup over his left ear. The ballroom sound came through clean, the applause, the clinking glasses, the faint jazz, but beneath all of it, in the negative space, he felt that pressure again. Listen. Felix's jaw clenched. He tried to rationalize it. He was tired. It was late. He'd been drinking too much coffee. The human brain looks for patterns, and yet the pressure had intention. He could feel it. He turned his chair away from the window that overlooked the ballroom and faced the back wall of the booth. A small space with gray acoustic panels and a metal door. On the door, someone had taped a laminated sign. Silence during speeches. Felix stared at it. The hum behind his ribs, the grief, seemed to harmonize with the pressure in the air. His wife, Miriam, had loved silence. She used to say the house felt kindest in the hour before dawn, when even the refrigerator seemed to breathe softly. Felix had always filled that quiet with radio, with sound, with the need to keep something speaking. Now the booth felt too quiet, and he realized the pressure wasn't trying to break into sound. It was trying to take sound away. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. No service in the booth. Old building, thick walls. But there was a notification anyway. Voicemail, unknown number. Felix's mouth went dry. He shouldn't. He knew he shouldn't. He listened anyway. Silence at first. Then breathing, slow, rhythmic. Not a human breath. Not quite. And then Miriam's voice. "Mr. Ashford," she said, using the formal teasing tone she used when she wanted him to do something he didn't want to do. "Stop pretending you can't hear me." Felix's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the phone. He stared at the screen, waiting for the voicemail to end, waiting for logic to reassert itself. Miriam was dead. He had watched her die. He had signed forms. He had sat in the funeral home office choosing a casket like selecting furniture. Her voice could not be on his phone. The voicemail continued. "You've been keeping the radio on," Miriam's voice said softly. "You've been filling every room with noise so you don't have to hear what's behind it." Felix swallowed hard. Behind it. The pressure in the booth increased, pressing against his skull. Then the voicemail ended with one last sentence, spoken in Miriam's voice with a strange flatness. "Turn it off." Felix sat frozen. In the ballroom, laughter rose again. He looked through the booth window at the crowd. They looked like animals in a warm pen, safe for now. He thought of Miriam on the kitchen floor, the onion smell and the quiet. He thought of her last breath, the way it had left her body, and the room had become so still Felix could hear his own heart. He realized with a kind of nausea that he had not been able to tolerate that stillness since. He had been afraid of silence. Not because silence is empty, but because silence is where your mind starts telling the truth. Felix stood and walked to the booth door. His hand hovered over the knob. The pressure in the air pulsed like a heartbeat. "Listen." He opened the door. The hallway outside was dim, lit by emergency lights. The gala was on the other side of the building, but the sound seeped faintly through walls. Music, laughter, a microphone. Felix stepped out. The pressure followed him, but it felt, pleased now, like a dog that had been called. He walked down the hallway toward a door marked "Service Stairs. Authorized personnel only." He knew the hotel layout well enough from the last few gigs. The service stairs led down to the basement where the electrical room and boiler lived. He should not go down there. He went anyway. The stairwell smelled like old concrete and damp metal. Each step echoed under his shoes in a way that made the silence feel thicker. At the bottom, a heavy door stood slightly ajar. A thin line of blue-white light leaked from it. Felix pushed the door open. The electrical room was larger than he expected. lined with panels and conduit and thick cables that ran like veins along the ceiling. A low hum filled the space, the sound of power moving. And in the center of the room, someone had placed a chair. An old wooden chair, the kind from a church basement. On the chair sat a pair of headphones, not modern, not sleek. Old broadcast headphones, heavy and padded, with the kind of coiled cable Felix hadn't seen in years. They looked exactly like the pair he wore his first day at the radio station, back when he was 22, and believed sound could save him. Felix's mouth went dry. He took a step closer. The pressure behind his ears intensified, as if his skull was becoming a speaker. He reached for the headphones. The cable was warm, not from electricity, from touch, like someone had held it recently. Felix put the headphones on. The world went quiet. The electrical hum faded. Then sound returned, but not the sound of the hotel. It was a recording, a tape. He heard Miriam in the kitchen, humming softly. He heard a knife chopping onions. He heard his own footsteps approaching, and then the sound of Miriam's body hitting the tile. Felix's breath stopped. He ripped the headphones off, gasping, but the sound didn't stop. It continued, now filling the room without speakers. Miriam's breathing became ragged. Felix heard his own voice, panicked. "Miriam, Miriam, talk to me." Then a wet sound, a gurgle, then silence, a deep, absolute silence that made Felix's vision pulse. In that silence, he heard something else, a voice that was not Miriam and not him. It spoke as pressure, as intent, as meaning that his brain translated into language because it had no other way to survive. "You keep noise to avoid the moment." Felix's knees weakened. He steadied himself against an electrical panel. The metal was cold. He swallowed hard. "What are you?" The answer came, not as sound, but as certainty. "We are what remains when sound is removed." Felix's skin prickled. He thought of his wife, of her voice, of the way grief lived inside him, like a constant hum. He thought of the gala upstairs, the donors laughing and clapping and congratulating themselves for their goodness. He understood then that the pressure wasn't haunting him. It was collecting him. It was using his love of sound as a lure, a way in him. "You used her voice," Felix whispered. The pressure shifted, almost amused. "You used her memory to avoid silence. Now we use it too." Felix's heart hammered. He backed away toward the door. The blue-white light in the room brightened without a source, painting the cables and panels in cold color. In the corners of the room, shadows gathered where no shadows should have been, thickening into shapes that suggested bodies without needing to be fully seen. Felix's ears pressed painfully. He felt as if he were underwater, deeper and deeper, pressure increasing. He stumbled into the hallway and slammed the door behind him. For a moment, the pressure eased. He leaned against the wall, panting. He told himself to go back upstairs, to return to the booth, to turn on the music and pretend nothing happened. But his phone buzzed again. A text somehow, despite no service. From Miriam. "Turn it off, Felix." Felix stared at the message. He thought of the radio station, of broadcast towers, of the way sound traveled across miles, of the way he had dedicated his life to making voices reach people. And now something wanted him to shut it all down. His hand shook as he typed. "No." The reply came instantly. "Then we will." The emergency lights in the hallway flickered and went out. Total darkness. Felix's breath came loud in his own ears. In the darkness, he heard footsteps. Not sound, exactly. Vibration through the concrete. Measured. Approaching. Felix fumbled for his phone flashlight. The screen turned on, then immediately went dark. He tried again. Nothing. The pressure in his skull grew until he felt his ears pop, and with that release came a sensation of sudden clarity, like the moment after a storm when the air becomes sharp and clean. Felix realized he could hear again. Not better, not louder, deeper. He could hear the building's bones, the flow of water through pipes, the faint static hum of fluorescent lights far above. And beneath it all, a deeper layer, a silence that moved. It brushed against him like a living thing. A voice formed in that silence, not Miriam's, not anyone's. It was too calm. The frequency is polluted. Felix's stomach turned. He understood then why the gala upstairs had made his teeth ache. The microphones, the speeches, the human need to fill air with words. He backed down the hallway, blind, hand on the wall, moving toward the service stairs. He needed out. He needed air. He needed to hear the real world again. The footsteps continued, matching his pace. Felix turned abruptly and ran up the stairs, lungs burning. At the top, the door to the ballroom floor was locked. He slammed his hands against it. It didn't budge. He tried the handle again, panic rising. Locked. From the other side, Felix's breath came fast. He pressed his ear to the door. He could hear the gala, the laughter, the jazz, so close, so human. He pounded on the door. Help! Open the door! No response. The sound on the other side continued as if he didn't exist. Felix understood with a sick clarity that sound could pass through the door, but he could not. He was already on the wrong side of something. He looked down the stairwell. The darkness below seemed to breathe. The footsteps had stopped, not because whatever was coming had left, because it was waiting. Felix slid down the wall and sat on the stair landing, his head in his hands. He thought of Miriam again. Her love of quiet, her insistence that some things should be heard without being drowned in noise. He whispered, "What do you want from me?" The answer came in a way that made his skin crawl, because it felt like the truth of his own grief spoken back to him. "Your silence." Felix's throat tightened. He wanted to scream, but the air felt thick, resistant, as if sound itself was being absorbed. The gala upstairs played on. The donors toasted. The children's hospital got its money. Felix sat in the stairwell and realized that no one would miss him for hours, maybe until dawn. He could imagine the headline, "Retired radio engineer found dead in hotel stairwell. Heart attack, perhaps. Elderly man collapses." Tragic, but not suspicious. And in the quiet, Felix felt something brush the back of his neck, like a breath that wasn't warm. Then Miriam's voice again, right against his ear. "Turn it off," she whispered. Felix squeezed his eyes shut. He didn't know if it was her memory or the thing using her voice. Maybe the distinction didn't matter. Maybe grief and haunting were the same kind of frequency. Felix opened his eyes. In the darkness below, pale blue-white light bloomed again without source, rising like fog. In that glow, Felix saw shapes on the stairs, human outlines, but wrong. Their edges blurred, as if they weren't fully in this world. They climbed without moving their legs, distance collapsing. Felix stood, shaking. He had one choice left, and it felt like the only honest one. He took the headphones from around his neck, the ones he always wore out of habit, and he placed them gently on the stair. Then he reached up and removed his hearing aids. The world dulled slightly, as if a curtain fell. He held the aids in his palm, tiny expensive pieces of technology that had helped him cling to sound. He looked at them like they were betrayals. Then he turned and threw them down the stairwell into the blue light. They disappeared, without making a sound. The shapes paused. The pressure eased. Felix felt something like approval. He stood very still and listened to what remained. The gala upstairs was still audible, but fainter now, as if the building itself was closing its ears. The hum of electricity softened, and in the expanding quiet, Felix felt the grief behind his ribs rise to the surface. Not as pain, as presence. Miriam was not speaking. Not anymore. But Felix could feel her the way you feel a familiar room in the dark. Felix whispered into the silence, "I'm here." The air pressed gently against him, and for a moment the pressure felt like a hand on his shoulder. Not threatening, not accusing, just there. Then the stairwell door above him clicked. Felix looked up. The door swung open. Light spilled in from the ballroom hallway, warm and golden. A hotel staffer stood there, a young man in a vest with a name tag that read Owen. "Sir?" Owen asked, brows knitting. "Are you all right? We got a report from the booth that the sound cut out. They said you didn't answer your radio." Felix blinked, dazed. The blue light below was gone. The stairwell was just a stairwell again, dark and ordinary. He felt his ears ache, empty without the aids. The gala's music drifted in. Jazz, applause. Felix swallowed and stood slowly. "I'm fine," he said, and his voice sounded too loud in his own head. Owen held the door open. "Come on, we'll get you back up there." Felix stepped through into the hallway. He glanced back down the stairwell. The darkness sat heavy but normal. For now. As Owen guided him back toward the booth, Felix realized something had changed. The hum of grief behind his ribs was quieter. Not gone, but softened, as if something had eaten part of it. Felix's mouth went dry. He looked at the ballroom full of donors and bright dresses and microphones. He understood then the cost of what he had just done. The thing didn't want sound. It wanted silence. And it had offered him a bargain in the only currency he valued. A piece of his hearing. A piece of his grief. Felix sat back in the booth and brought the music up. He watched the crowd smile. He watched the microphones gleam. And he realized he was no longer afraid of silence. What frightened him now was something else entirely. The thought that somewhere in the building, in the electrical room, a chair waited with old headphones on it, waiting for the next person who loved sound enough to follow it into the dark. Story 3. Desmond Caldwell first felt the wrongness in his fingertips. Not pain, not numbness, a subtle change in texture, as if the skin on his hands had been replaced with a thin layer of wax. He noticed it while shelving books in the children's section of the Easton Public Library, a small brick building in a Massachusetts town that smelled perpetually of wet coats and paper and old carpet. Desmond Caldwell, 34 years old, worked as the library's archivist, a job he'd taken after a decade of bouncing through temp work and half-finished plans. He liked the quiet. He liked the predictability. He liked the way the building held the past in steady rows. He did not like surprises, which was unfortunate, because on a Tuesday in March, the library received a donation. A box of books, a tote bag of loose photographs, a stack of journals tied with twine, and one object that wasn't listed on the donation slip. A small wooden drawer. Not a chest, not a box. A single drawer, like it had been pulled from a larger piece of furniture and separated from its body. It was heavy for its size. It didn't have a handle. The front face was smooth except for a faint circular indentation, like a thumbprint pressed into the wood long ago and left there permanently. Desmond found it on the donation cart at closing time. His co-worker, Vera Finch, had shrugged when he held it up. Vera was in her late 40s with bright-dyed hair and an energy that never seemed to drain, even at the end of a shift. "Probably someone's junk," she said. "We get weird stuff. Just put it in Lost and Found, or send it to facilities." Desmond frowned. "It's not on the slip." "So call it a bonus," Vera said, grinning. "Maybe it's full of cash." Desmond didn't laugh. He carried the drawer to the back workroom and set it on the table under the harsh fluorescent lights. The wood looked old but not antique. The grain was tight. The corners were worn smooth, as if hands had touched it constantly. Desmond tried to pull it open. It didn't budge. No seam, no gap. Just a drawer that refused to be a drawer. He turned it over. No screws, no hinges, no hidden latch. Only that faint circular indentation on the front, like a place where a finger belonged. Desmond stared at it longer than he should have. Something about it made his teeth ache, the way a song can get stuck in your head even after it stopped playing. He told himself he would log it, photograph it, and then call facilities. But his hands moved without fully asking permission. He pressed his thumb into the circular indentation. The wood was warm, not room temperature, warm like skin. Desmond yanked his hand back. For a second, he thought he saw the drawer's surface shift, like breathing, a subtle expansion and contraction. He blinked hard. The drawer sat still. Vera called from the front desk that she was locking up. Desmond wrapped the drawer in brown paper because that was what you did with objects that didn't make sense. You contained them with procedure. He slid it into an archive storage cabinet and locked it away. Then he went home. That night, he dreamed of drawers. Not metaphorical drawers, not memory drawers. Actual drawers, endless rows of them, stacked in a room that smelled of cedar and dust. He walked between them barefoot, the floor cold under his feet. Each drawer had a circular indentation, each one weighted. And somewhere deep in the maze, someone was opening them, slowly, one by one, with the patient care of a person removing bandages. Desmond woke at 3:47 a.m., with his hands tingling. His fingertips felt wrong. He flexed them in the darkness, rubbing thumb against forefinger. The skin felt smoother than it should. Too slick, too new. He got up, turned on the bathroom light, and stared at his hands. The fingerprints on his thumbs had blurred slightly, like someone had smeared them. Desmond's throat tightened. He worked with archives. He had seen old documents, old photographs, old evidence files. He had seen what time did to paper and ink and skin, but he had never seen fingerprints begin to erase overnight. He went to work early. The library smelled of yesterday's coffee and cleaning solution. The building made its usual settling noises. Desmond unlocked the archive cabinet and pulled the drawer out. It was warmer than it had been the night before. He set it on the table and stared. He didn't want to touch it. He touched it anyway. His thumb hovered over the indentation. He told himself he would do it quickly, just to confirm whether he'd imagined the warmth. He pressed. The drawer clicked. Not loudly, just a small mechanical sound like a lock releasing. A seam appeared along the top edge that hadn't been there before. Desmond's breath caught. He pulled. The drawer slid out smoothly, as if it had always been functional, and he'd simply been too stupid to find the correct way. Inside was a slip of paper. Not folded, not tucked, just lying there, centered, like an offering. The paper was blank except for one line, handwritten in neat block letters. Desmond Caldwell, 34, archivist. Desmond's pulse spiked. He glanced around the workroom. Nobody. The library wasn't open yet. He picked up the paper with trembling fingers. On the back was another line, "Open again." Desmond swallowed hard and looked back into the drawer. The interior was empty. Bare wood, no hidden compartments, just emptiness. He slid the drawer closed, then opened it again immediately, as if speed could catch trickery. This time, there was a photograph inside. A photo of Desmond, taken through his living room window last night. Him standing in his kitchen in pajamas, a glass of water in his hand. The angle was wrong, low, like it had been taken from outside, from someone crouched in the dark. Desmond's mouth went dry. He dropped the photo onto the table as if it burned. He looked down at his fingertips again. The skin looked slightly paler, as if blood wasn't reaching it properly. Desmond forced himself to breathe slowly. He did the thing he always did when confronted with the unknown. He researched. He pulled donation records. He checked the slip. He looked up the listed donor. The donor name was handwritten, M. Whitmore. No address, no phone number, just an email that bounced back when he tried to message it. He asked Vera if she remembered who dropped off the donation. Vera frowned, thinking. Older. Guy. Nice coat. Smelled like cedar. He didn't talk much. Did he sign anything? Desmond asked. Vera shrugged. He just said he was cleaning out his mother's place. He looked tired. Desmond's stomach tightened. Whitmore. Cedar smell. Old wood. He searched local records for Whitmore Estates. He found an obituary from 5 years ago. Marjorie Whitmore, age 79, survived by no children. Donations requested to the library. Desmond's throat tightened. He clicked deeper into the archive. The obituary photo showed an elderly woman with a firm jaw and a careful smile. Behind her shoulder in the blurred background, Desmond saw something that made his vision pulse. A cabinet. A tall wooden cabinet with drawers. Dozens of them. Each drawer had a circular indentation. Desmond's mouth went dry. He looked at the drawer on his work table. He imagined it separated from that cabinet, like a piece of a larger body. He thought of his dream, the endless drawers, the feeling of someone opening them. He stared at the drawer until his eyes ached. Then he opened it again. This time, the drawer contained a small object. A key. Not a modern key. An old brass key. Heavy. With a simple cut. On the key ring was a tag with a number. Desmond's breath hitched. His dream had ended at 3:47 a.m. He looked at his phone. It was 8:13 a.m. The library would open in less than an hour. He shouldn't pursue this. He should lock the drawer away and call facilities, and maybe call the police, and definitely call a therapist. But the key sat in the drawer like a command. Desmond took it. As soon as his fingers closed around the metal, he felt a tug in his fingertips, like the key had hooked into his skin. He gasped, dropping it. The key clattered on the table. His fingertips stung. He held his hands up and saw thin gray lines across his pads like faint scratches. Not bleeding, just marks, like tally marks. Desmond swallowed hard. He looked at the key again. He thought of the circular indentation, the way the drawer opened only when his thumb pressed it, as if it needed him, as if it recognized him. He glanced toward the archive storage room door. The larger archive storage was in the basement level, where old newspapers and town records and microfilm lived. There was an old room down there that Desmond never used, a sealed section that had once been part of the building's original 1908 construction. Facilities called it the Old Stacks. Desmond had never gone in. It was damp and cramped and rumored to have asbestos. But he had seen the door, a thick wooden door with an old lock. And on the lock plate, he remembered, there was a number. Desmond's stomach rolled. He took the key again, carefully holding it between two fingers like it might bite. He walked down the staff stairs to the basement. The air grew colder with each step. The smell changed, from books and dust to damp concrete and old metal. He reached the door to the old stacks. The number 47 was painted on the wall beside it in faded black. Desmond's hands trembled as he fit the key into the lock. It turned easily. The door swung inward with a slow exhale of air that smelled like cedar and something sweet beneath it. Something organic, like dried flowers left too long in a closed book. Desmond stepped inside. The old stacks room was larger than he expected, lined with wooden cabinets, drawer cabinets, dozens of them, hundreds. They filled the room in neat rows, each cabinet stacked with small drawers, each drawer with the same circular indentation. The air was still. No hum of ventilation, no building noise. Silence so complete Desmond could hear his heartbeat. He took one step forward and the floor creaked softly under him, a sound that felt like a violation. He turned toward the nearest cabinet. One drawer stood slightly open, just a crack. Desmond's mouth went dry. He approached slowly. His fingertips tingled again, the wrongness intensifying. He reached out and pulled the drawer open. Inside was a book. Not a normal book. A small ledger, leather-bound. Desmond opened it. The pages were filled with names. Hundreds of names in neat handwriting, each one followed by a number, a date, and a brief description. Janelle Muir, 29, firefighter, lost in smoke. Otto Rourke, 41, accountant, heart failure. Harper Lee, 9, hit by car. Desmond's throat tightened. These weren't donation records. These were deaths. He flipped pages quickly. The entries spanned decades. Some from the 1970s, some from last month. The handwriting never changed. The same tidy block letters, as if one hand had been recording them forever. Desmond turned a page and froze. His name was there. Desmond Caldwell, 34, archivist. The space next to it was blank. No date, no description, as if his entry was waiting to be completed. Desmond's breath came shallow. He backed away from the ledger, still open in his hands. Air in the room shifted, not with sound, with presence. Desmond felt it behind him like heat from a body. He did not turn. He whispered, voice shaking, "What is this?" The answer came, not from a mouth, but from the room itself, as a pressure behind his eyes. "This is where you put what you cannot carry." Desmond's stomach rolled. "I didn't put anything here," he whispered. The room's answer was patient. "You did. Every day. You archive the town's grief. You file it. You preserve it. You keep it from rotting into the world." Desmond's hands trembled. He thought of his work, the way people brought in boxes of old photos and asked him to keep them safe, the way families donated records so their history wouldn't disappear. He thought of the drawer in his workroom, the way it had asked him to open it again. Desmond swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" The silence deepened, and in it he felt something brush his fingertips, like cold air moving under skin. "We want your hands." Desmond's breath hitched. He stared at his fingertips again. The skin looked paler now, almost translucent. He felt his fingerprints smoothing away, his identity being erased from the only part of him that touched the world. He backed toward the door. The room did not stop him. It didn't need to, because as he turned, he saw that the door was gone. In its place was another cabinet. More drawers, endless. Desmond's stomach dropped. He spun slowly, searching for the exit. The room had expanded, or his perception had collapsed. and the cabinets now stretched farther than the building could contain. The air smelled strongly of cedar and something sweet and rotten. Desmond clutched the ledger like a lifeline. He walked between cabinets, heart hammering. He pulled open drawers at random. Inside were objects: a child's shoe, still dusty, a wedding ring, a pocket watch stopped at 3:47, a lock of hair in an envelope, a photograph of someone smiling, their eyes scratched out. Each object felt warm, as if it had been held recently, even if the ledger said it belonged to someone dead decades ago. Desmond's throat tightened. He realized what this place was. Not a library, not an archive, a storage room for what people couldn't bear. A place where grief was kept in drawers so it wouldn't flood the world. And he, archivist, had been marked as useful. His fingertips tingled, as if the room was already claiming them. Desmond forced himself to breathe. He looked down at the ledger again, at his blank line. He understood then that the drawer in his apartment had been a piece of this place, sent up like a hook, a lure, a way to get him to bring his hands down here. His hands that could open drawers. His hands that could catalog and preserve and keep order. Desmond's throat tightened. He whispered, "No." The air pressed against his ears. "Open." Desmond clenched his fists. "No, open." He felt his fingers twitch without his permission. Desmond stared at his hands in horror as they reached for the nearest drawer. He fought, muscles straining, but his fingers moved anyway. His thumb pressed into the circular indentation. The drawer slid open. Inside was a sheet of paper, blank. Then, as Desmond watched, ink appeared, forming letters. Date, today, description. Desmond's breath came fast. The room wanted him to write his own ending, to complete the record, to become an object stored neatly away. Desmond swallowed hard, and with a surge of stubbornness he hadn't felt in years, he did the only thing he could think of. He tore the paper in half. The sound was loud in the silence, like a scream. The cabinet shuddered, not physically but perceptually, as if the space itself recoiled. The air pressure spiked, making Desmond's ears pop painfully. He clutched the torn paper and ran, not knowing where the exit was, but knowing that moving was better than being catalogued. He ran between cabinets, breath burning, fingertips stinging, and then he saw it. A seam in the air, a thin place, like the eraser mark he'd seen in the pharmacy aisle months ago. Though he couldn't remember thinking about that before now. A blankness between cabinets, a place where the world looked rubbed thin. Desmond lunged. The air resisted, thick like gelatin. He pushed harder, shoulder first. The resistance increased. He thought of the drawer asking for his thumb, asking for his compliance. He thought of his fingerprints fading. He screamed, an ugly, raw sound, and shoved his whole body forward. The blank air gave way. Desmond tumbled out onto cold concrete. He lay panting, staring up at a low ceiling. The basement hallway ceiling. The real building. The door to the old stacks was behind him. Closed. Locked. Desmond's hand shook as he pushed himself upright. He looked at his fingertips. His fingerprints were back. Not perfect, not crisp, but present, like bruises that hadn't fully healed. Desmond sat there on the floor until his breathing steadied. Then he stood and walked upstairs, each step careful. He locked the donation drawer in the archive cabinet and wrote an email to facilities requesting immediate removal of an unidentified wooden cabinet component found on donation cart. He did not mention the ledger. He did not mention the names. He did not mention that he could still smell cedar on his hands. For weeks nothing happened. The drawer remained locked away. Desmond's fingerprints remained intact. He began to convince himself it had been stress, a dream, a dissociative episode. Then one morning, the library received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single slip of paper. Desmond Caldwell, 34, archivist, and beneath it, a second line. "We have your touch." Desmond looked at his hands and felt for the first time since childhood the desire to cut them off just to be free. He didn't. He couldn't. Instead, he did what he had always done. He cataloged the paper, filed it, and tried to pretend that storing something was the same as getting rid of it. The drawer in the cabinet under lock warmed gently like a sleeping animal, waiting for him to open again. Story 4. On the morning Esme Lockhart took the job, the ocean smelled like pennies. Not brine, not seaweed. Copper and damp metal, the scent of coins left in a child's palm too long. The weather forecast called it a coastal inversion. Fog and humidity and pressure shifts. Esme didn't care what it was called. She cared that it paid. Esme Lockhart, 46 years old, recently divorced and newly responsible for her father's medical bills, had taken the position as winter caretaker for a seaside motel outside Rockport, Maine. Because the listing promised two things: solitude and a paycheck. The Sea Glass Motor Lodge sat on a low bluff above the water, a row of single-story rooms arranged like teeth. The summer tourists had left weeks ago. The town had folded into itself. The beach was empty except for gulls and driftwood and the occasional dog walker, bundled in layers. Esme's job was simple. Check the rooms once a day. Run the heat on low so pipes didn't freeze. Make sure the roof didn't leak. Call the owner, Bernard Thorne, if anything broke. Bernard had met her in the parking lot when she arrived with her suitcase and a box of groceries. He was in his 70s, thin and brisk, wearing a wool cap and a smile that looked practiced. "Quiet season," he'd said. "Good for thinking. Bad for the nerves if you're the type who needs company." "I'm not," Esme had lied. Bernard had nodded, as if he could smell lies the way Esme smelled pennies on the air. He handed her a key ring, office key, maintenance shed, and the guest room keys. "You're in Unit 7. Best view." Esme took the keys and felt the metal cold against her palm. Bernard hesitated, then added, "One more thing. Don't go into Unit 12. Esme blinked. "Why?" Bernard's eyes flicked toward the far end of the motel row. Unit 12's curtains were drawn. The door looked freshly painted. "It's being renovated," Bernard said. "Floor's unstable. I'll handle it when I'm back in spring." Esme nodded, though the word unstable snagged in her mind. Bernard left, his truck's tires spitting gravel. The motel settled into silence. Esme unpacked in Unit 7. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. The bedspread was a faded pattern of seashells. The window faced the water. She stood there for a long time, listening to the ocean. Not the dramatic crash of waves, but a steady shushing, like the world trying to soothe itself. She thought, briefly, that she might sleep here, that the solitude might be clean. Then she saw something on the beach, a figure far enough away that it was only a shape against gray water, standing near the tide line, motionless. Esme squinted. It looked like a person in a long coat. She watched for a moment, waiting for it to move. It didn't. The figure stayed, still as the waves approached and retreated. Esme felt her skin prickle. She told herself it was a fisherman, someone watching the surf. Then the fog thickened, and the figure vanished. That first week passed in quiet routine. Esme checked rooms. She ran faucets. She repaired a loose hinge on the office door. She made coffee and drank it watching the water. The motel was empty. No guests, no phone calls, no cars in the lot. On the 6th day, she found a towel on the ground outside Unit 12. It was white, clean, folded neatly, like it had been placed there intentionally. Esme stared at it. She hadn't been near Unit 12. She'd obeyed Bernard's warning without even knowing why. She picked up the towel. It was damp. Not from rain. It hadn't rained. Damp like it had been used, and it smelled faintly of pennies. Esme's mouth went dry. She carried the towel to the laundry room, washed it, and told herself not to think. But that night, lying in bed, she heard something, a sound that didn't belong in an empty motel. A door latch clicking, a soft thud of footsteps on old carpet. Esme sat up, listening. The sound came again. Footsteps, slow, measured, moving past Unit 7's door, heading toward Unit 12. Esme's throat tightened. She reached for her phone. No signal. Of course. She lay still, listening. The footsteps stopped. Silence returned. Then, from the far end of the motel row, she heard water. Not ocean water. Water splashing in a bathtub. Esme's skin went cold. She got up, pulled on a sweater, and stepped into the hallway outside her unit. The motel corridor was outdoors, exposed to the salt air. The fog had rolled in thick, turning the row of doors into a tunnel of pale gray. The only light came from the orange glow of the office sign. Esme walked slowly, heart hammering. She passed Unit 8, 9, 10, each door closed, each room empty. The air smelled like wet wood. When she reached Unit 12, she stopped. The door was ajar, just a crack. Esme stared at it. Her hand hovered over the knob. Bernard had warned her. Floor unstable, renovation. But the sound of water came from inside, soft splashing, slow movement. Esme swallowed hard. "Hello?" she called. No response. She pushed the door open. The room inside was dark, except for a faint blue glow. Not from a lamp, not from a TV, from the bathroom. Esme stepped inside, careful. The carpet under her feet was dry, normal. The bed was made, but the blanket pattern was different from the other rooms. Not seashells. A solid gray blanket, neatly tucked. The air smelled strongly of pennies. Esme moved toward the bathroom door. The blue glow brightened. She pushed the bathroom door open. The bathtub was full, not with water, with the ocean. The tub held dark seawater that moved with the rhythm of waves rising and falling gently, as if the bathroom contained a piece of the Atlantic. Foam lapped against porcelain, and in the water, a person lay on their back. A woman, pale as driftwood, hair floating around her head like seaweed. Her eyes were open. She looked dead, but her chest rose, slow and shallow, as if breathing underwater. Esme froze. The woman's eyes shifted, focusing on Esme. Her mouth opened. No sound came out, but Esme heard her anyway, not through ears, but through pressure, the way you can feel weather changes before storms. Help. Esme's throat constricted. She took a step backward. The bathroom floor under her foot felt soft, not rotten, soft like wet sand. Esme looked down. The tile floor had become sand. Damp, compacted sand that yielded under her shoe. Esme's stomach dropped. She backed toward the door. The sand spread, creeping outward from the bathroom like a tide. The woman in the tub watched her, eyes wide, pleading. "Help." Esme whispered, "What is this?" The tub water surged slightly, and Esme felt the ocean's pull in her own bones, the way it tugs at blood. The woman's mouth moved again. "Take my shift." Esme's skin prickled. "No," she whispered. "No, I'm the caretaker. I'm not. The woman's eyes filled with something like desperation. Take my shift. Esme felt a wave of cold sweep through her body, as if her veins filled with seawater. She stumbled into the main room, the door behind her slamming shut on its own. The bathroom glow leaked under the door like moonlight. Esme grabbed the doorknob to escape. It didn't turn. Locked. From the outside. Esme's breath came fast. She yanked harder. The knob remained still. The room felt smaller. The air thicker. The smell of pennies increased until it coated her tongue. Esme backed away from the door and looked around. On the nightstand was a guest register. Not the motel's computer system. A paper register. Old-fashioned. Open to a page. The page was blank, except for one line, written in careful handwriting. Shift. Winter caretaker. Name. Esme's throat tightened. She shook her head. No. The bathroom door clicked. Esme turned. The door opened slowly. The sand flowed out across the carpet, transforming it into damp grit. The woman emerged from the bathtub, climbing out, rising, as if the water was holding her up. She floated forward, dripping seawater that left no puddles. Her eyes stayed fixed on Esme. Help! Esme backed away until she hit the wall. Her hands shook. She thought of her father in a nursing home bed, his lungs filling with fluid, the way he stared at her like she could undo time if she wanted badly enough. She thought of her divorce papers, of her empty apartment, of her need for money. She thought of how easy it had been to accept this job, how desperate she had been for a place to hide. The woman floated closer. Take my shift, Esme whispered. What happens if I don't? The answer came from the room itself. Then you drown anyway. Esme's breath hitched. The sand under her shoes softened further, turning to mud. Her ankles sank. She tried to lift her foot and found resistance, like the ground wanted to keep her. Her heart hammered. The woman reached out, her fingers pale and wrinkled like they'd been in water too. Long. Esme's throat tightened. I'm sorry, Esme whispered. And then, because survival is a cruel instinct, she lunged past the woman toward the register. Her hand grabbed the pen on the nightstand. Her fingers shook as she wrote her name in the blank line, Esme Lockhart. As soon as the ink hit paper, the room exhaled. The pressure eased. The sand stopped spreading. The woman in the tub room blinked. For a moment, her face looked less dead, more human. Relief flickered across her features. Then, like a tide reversing, the seawater in the bathtub surged. A wave rose inside the small room impossibly high, as if the ocean had found a doorway and was eager to reclaim what it had stored. The wave crashed over the woman. She vanished into water. The bathroom glow died. The carpet in the main room returned to carpet. Esme stood trembling, the pen still in her hand. The doorknob clicked. The front door to Unit 12 swung open. Cool, foggy air flooded in. Esme stumbled out onto the outdoor corridor, gasping. The motel looked normal again. Empty doors. Quiet ocean. But something had changed. The keys in her pocket felt heavier. Her chest felt full, like she'd swallowed salt water. She walked back to Unit 7 on unsteady legs. In her room, she looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her skin looked the same, but her eyes looked older. Not dramatically, not like a horror movie, just slightly more tired. Slightly more familiar with surrender. That night, her phone rang. It had not rung at all since she arrived. No signal, no reception. Now it rang anyway. Esme answered with shaking fingers. A man's voice, cheerful and distant, like a call center worker reading a script. "Hello, this is the Sea Glass Motor Lodge," he said. We're calling to confirm a reservation for Unit 12. Guest arriving tonight. Esme's throat went dry. We're closed. It's winter. The man's voice stayed cheerful. Oh no, Unit 12 is always open. Esme swallowed hard. Who is the guest? A pause. Then the man's voice changed slightly, becoming softer, more intimate. You'll see, he said. The line went dead. Esme stared at the phone. Outside, the fog thickened, and on the beach she saw a figure again, standing near the tide line. This time she understood. It wasn't a fisherman. It was someone waiting for their room key. Esme Lockhart, caretaker, looked out at the ocean that smelled like pennies and realized the job was exactly what it had promised. Solitude and a paycheck. The motel didn't need her comfort. It needed her shift. Story 5. The taste of metal was the first sign Tobias Merrick had made a mistake. It came when he licked his lips in the dry air of the archives room. A faint copper tang like he'd bitten his tongue. He hadn't. There was no blood, just the taste. Tobias Merrick, 29 years old, worked as a locksmith for a small company in Chicago that specialized in commercial security. He was good at it, not because he loved locks, but because he loved the certainty they promised. A locked door meant boundary. A lock meant consent. Or it was supposed to. The job that brought him to the Lakeside Municipal Building was routine on paper. A city contract. Replace old locks on the basement archive rooms. Update keys. Improve access control. The building was a 1920s limestone structure near the lake, beautiful in the way government buildings try to be, with high ceilings and echoing hallways and the smell of old paper baked into the walls. Tobias arrived at 6:45 p.m. in January after public hours, escorted by a facilities manager named Harriet Aldridge. Harriet was in her 50s, hair pulled tight, posture rigid, the kind of woman who used competence as armor. Basement archives, she said, leading him down a hallway lined with portraits of past mayors. They've had some incidents, people getting locked in, keys lost. We're tired of it. Tobias nodded, carrying his tool bag. Incidents? He asked. Harriet's mouth tightened. Just do the locks, Mr. Merrick. The basement stairwell was colder than the rest of the building. The air smelled of dust and old plumbing. The fluorescent lights buzzed in a way that made Tobias's temples ache. They reached the archive corridor. It was a narrow hallway lined with metal doors, each labeled with a number and a date range. Archive 1, 1930 to 1950. Archive 2, 1951 to 1970. And at the end, a door with no label, no handle, only a keyhole. The metal around the keyhole looked worn, as if many keys had entered it over many years. Tobias slowed. Harriet didn't look at the door. She focused on the labeled ones. Start with Archive 1, she said. We'll do the rest in sequence. The unlabeled door isn't in your work order. Tobias glanced at the unlabeled door again. No handle. That was unusual. A door without a handle is still a door, Tobias said, half joking. Harriet stopped and turned, her eyes sharp. Don't touch that one, she said, voice flat. Tobias's skin prickled. Why? Harriet swallowed once. Because it's not for you. Tobias raised his hands in surrender. Fine. I'm here for the contract. He started on Archive 1. The lock was old, a simple mortise lock. Tobias removed it carefully, replaced it with a modern cylinder, tested the key, logged the serial number. Routine, comforting. Harriet hovered nearby, checking her clipboard, making small, impatient noises. Half an hour later, Tobias finished Archive 2, then 3. He worked steadily, the rhythm of tools and screws and key turns soothing. At 9:13 p.m., Harriet's phone rang. She stepped away to answer, walking toward the stairwell. Tobias was alone in the corridor for the first time. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air tasted faintly metallic again. Tobias glanced down the corridor toward the unlabeled door. It sat at the end, like a punctuation mark. He told himself not to. He didn't believe in haunted doors. He believed in bad building maintenance, in old locks sticking, in people panicking and losing keys. But he was a locksmith. Curiosity was part of the job. He walked toward the unlabeled door, slow, like he could pretend he wasn't choosing to. The keyhole looked ordinary, standard size. Tobias leaned closer. Inside the keyhole, he saw not darkness, but a faint blue glow, like distant light reflecting off water. His throat tightened. He reached into his tool bag and pulled out a small borescope camera, the kind used to inspect lock mechanisms. He fed the camera into the keyhole. The screen in his hand flickered, then displayed an image that made his stomach drop. Not the inside of a lock, a room. A long room with shelves. Not shelves of paper. Shelves of keys. Thousands of keys hung on hooks, each one tagged with a name. The air in that room looked thick, dusty, like time had accumulated into visible haze. And in the center of the room, a figure stood with its back to the camera. Tall, still, wearing something that might have been a coat, or might have been its own skin hanging wrong. Tobias's mouth went dry. The figure turned slowly, as if it could sense the camera. The screen filled with its face. Or what should have been a face. It was blank, smooth, like a mannequin's, except for a single keyhole where a mouth should have been. Tobias's hands went numb. He yanked the camera out. The blue glow in the keyhole vanished. He took a step back, heart hammering. He told himself to go find Harriet and leave, to pretend he hadn't seen anything. Then behind him, a lock clicked. Tobias spun. Archive 3's door was open. He hadn't left it open. He always closed doors. It was a habit, almost superstition. The open door revealed a dark room beyond. Tobias's mouth went dry. He could smell something drifting from inside. Not dust, not mildew. Something sweet and chemical, like old metal cleaned with polish, like pennies. Tobias backed away, slowly. The open door swung wider on its own, inviting. His phone buzzed. No service in the basement, but it buzzed anyway. A text notification. Unknown number. You looked. Tobias stared at the words. His mouth tasted copper. He typed with shaking fingers. Who is this? The reply came immediately. We keep the keys. Tobias swallowed hard. He thought of the room on the borescope screen. Keys on hooks like trophies. He typed. Why? The answer came in 2 lines. Because people lock what they cannot face. Because locks are promises. Tobias's breath came shallow. He thought of his own life. He had left his father's house at 18 and never gone back. He had locked away memories of his mother's death, the way she had looked in the hospital bed, the way his father's grief had turned cruel. He had become a locksmith because locks made sense. They didn't. Not like this. Harriet returned, footsteps echoing. Tobias, she called down the hall. We're done for tonight. Pack up. Tobias didn't answer. He stared at the unlabeled door. His body felt like it was full of cold. Harriet approached, frowning. What are you doing? I told you not to. She stopped when she saw his face. Tobias, she said softer. Did you... The fluorescent lights flickered. For half a second the corridor dimmed, and Tobias saw something in the air. Shapes, not shadows. Not exactly. Thin silhouettes in the periphery, as if people stood just outside the range of full existence. Then the light steadied. Harriet's face was pale. Her jaw clenched. "Come on," she whispered. "We're leaving." Tobias nodded, grateful, and followed her toward the stairwell. Behind them, the unlabeled door's keyhole emitted a faint blue glow again. At the stairwell, Harriet's keycard didn't work. She swiped it once. Red light. She swiped again. Red. Her hand trembled slightly. "Tobias," she whispered. "The basement door sometimes sticks. It—" Tobias stepped forward and tried the handle. It didn't move. Locked. From the other side, Tobias's heart hammered. Harriet swallowed. "This is why I told you not to touch it." Tobias's mouth went dry. "What is it?" Harriet stared at the locked stairwell door like it could answer. "It's where the city puts things it can't solve," she said, voice thin. "Keys that don't have doors anymore. Doors that don't want to open. Records that don't want to be read." Tobias's breath hitched. Behind them, the corridor temperature dropped. The metallic taste intensified. Tobias turned slowly. The unlabeled door at the far end was open now. Not cracked, wide open. Blue-white light spilled out, flooding the corridor like moonlight on water. And in that light, Tobias saw the room from the borescope. Shelves of keys, endless. The figure with the blank face stood at the threshold, its keyhole mouth dark. It didn't walk toward them. It didn't need to. The air itself shifted, pulling. Tobias felt his keys in his pocket tug slightly, as if magnetized. Harriet's keys on her belt rattled softly. Tobias's throat tightened. What does it want? Harriet's eyes were wide, shining with fear. "It wants what all locks want," she whispered. "Closure." The figure lifted one hand. In its palm was a key, a small brass key. Tobias recognized it instantly, though he had not seen it before. His house key, the one from his father's home. The key he hadn't carried in years. The key he thought he had lost. Tobias's breath stopped. "How do you—" he whispered. But the question didn't matter. The figure's blank face tilted slightly, and Tobias felt meaning press into his skull. "You left a door unfinished." Tobias's chest tightened. He thought of his father's house, the locked bedroom where his mother had died, the way his father refused to enter it again, the way the whole house had become a museum of pain. He had left. He had locked himself out. He had told himself distance was safety. The figure held out the key. Tobias's hand shook. Harriet whispered, "Don't take it." But Tobias couldn't stop staring at it, because the key represented a door he had avoided for 11 years. A door his mind had built a lock around. The blue light pulsed. The air pulled harder, like a tide. Tobias took a step forward. Harriet grabbed his arm. "Tobias, no!" Tobias swallowed hard. "I have to." Harriet's grip tightened, desperate. You don't have to go in there. You can leave things locked." Tobias stared at the key in the figure's hand. He thought of his life full of locks, full of boundaries, full of doors he never opened, because opening meant facing what was on the other side. He felt suddenly exhausted. He looked at Harriet. "What happens if I don't?" Harriet's voice trembled. "Then it comes for your keys anyway." Tobias's throat tightened. He stepped forward, gently pulling free from Harriet's grip. He reached out. The key was cold against his palm, colder than metal should be. As soon as his fingers closed around it, Tobias felt a sharp tug in his chest like a chain hooking into him. The figure stepped backward into the blue-lit room. Tobias followed, one step at a time, drawn by the cold key in his hand. Behind him, Harriet screamed his name. The corridor disappeared as the threshold swallowed him. The room of keys smelled like old metal and dust. The shelves stretched farther than any basement could contain. Tobias's footsteps made no sound. The figure moved ahead of him, leading him deeper. On every shelf, tags swung gently, each one labeled with a name. Some names Tobias recognized from city plaques, some names he didn't. Then he saw his own. Tobias Merrick. The tag hung on a hook where a key should have been. Blank. Waiting. Tobias's breath came shallow. The figure stopped and turned. Its blank face offered no expression, only the dark keyhole mouth. The key in Tobias's hand grew heavier. He understood then. This wasn't a room of keys. It was a room of unfinished doors, of locked memories, of closures demanded. And Tobias, locksmith, had been summoned because he believed in locks. The figure's keyhole mouth spoke without sound, meaning pressing into Tobias's mind like cold. Put it back. Tobias's stomach rolled. Put what back? The key warmed slightly in his palm. His house key. The key to his father's door. The door he had left unfinished. Tobias whispered, "I can't. My father..." The meaning pressed harder. "Then you stay." Tobias's breath hitched. He looked behind him. There was no corridor, no stairwell, only shelves of keys, endless. Tobias's heart hammered. He clutched the key and realized the trap. The room offered only one way out. Closure. To return to the door he'd abandoned. To open it, face what was behind it, and finish what he'd refused to finish. Or to remain here, another key on a hook, another lock held in cold storage. Tobias swallowed hard. In the distance, he heard something like the sound of waves, though there was no water here. Or perhaps it was the sound of countless keys gently rattling, a wind moving through them like breath. Tobias stared at the hook labeled with his name. He did not know if he would ever leave, but he knew, with sudden brutal clarity, that every lock he had ever installed had been a promise. And promises, sooner or later, demanded to be kept. The metallic taste filled his mouth. The shelves went on, and somewhere far away, in the basement corridor of the Lakeside Municipal Building, Harriet Aldridge would later tell police that Tobias Merrick vanished between one breath and the next, leaving only his tool bag on the floor and a single unlabeled door at the end of the hall, locked as it had always been. But in the room of keys, Tobias found a hook that now held a fresh brass key. It was tagged neatly, Harriet Aldridge. And Tobias realized, with horror and something like understanding, that the room didn't only collect those who looked. It collected those who tried to keep others from looking too. Because that was another kind of lock, and the room loved locks. Thank you for spending this time with me, here in the dark, where the world quiets down enough for strange things to feel close. I hope these stories gave you what you came for, something unsettling, but gentle enough to drift to sleep with, if sleep is willing to take you. If you enjoyed this episode of the Stillness Broadcast, you can subscribe for more, only if it earns a place in your nights, wherever you are, whatever hour it is for you. I'm grateful you chose to listen alongside the rest of us, strangers sharing the same silence. Sleep well, dream softly, and if you wake to a room that feels slightly different than it should, don't panic. Sometimes it's just the mind, and sometimes it's something that remembers you. Until next time, this has been the Stillness Broadcast.